Greetings, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Reading Epic Threads. I'm your host, Patrick Gunnels. I'm joining you from Houston, Texas, and today is April 20th, 2026 at 3:15 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Let us begin, shall we? I want to get started as quickly as possible because today I really want to catch up with our friend Billie. Because I haven't been doing any Reading Epic Threads, I'm way behind on everything. Now, I originally did present All Roads Lead to 9/11 Chapter 1, Crossfire Hurricane, more or less contemporarily with when it was written. The next part, Chapter 2, I have not gotten to. So let's begin with that, shall we? In the meantime, please, I'm at a new time. I want you to do me a huge favor and hit that thumbs up button on Rumble. Share it with your friends. Tell the people, yes, Patrick's doing a Reading Epic Threads, and it's good. The dig that I was talking about on yesterday's Breaking the System, I'll have to wait a little bit on that, but I will get to that as well. It's exciting as well. All right. Now, my friends. Oh, and also go to tulipblooms.shop, guys. Promo code Shapiro. Mother's Day is coming up. The Mother's Day special runs through a week before Mother's Day. Get your mother the basket of her dreams. You get 5 or more products. Bam! 20% off. Use promo code Shapiro. It's another 10% off. What are you waiting for? Tulipblooms.shop. Your skin will thank you. Your mother's skin will thank you. And now, from dawnbilly.substack.com. All roads lead to 9/11 Chapter 2, the CIA. Corruption, incompetence, or arrogance? The work of a nation, the center of intelligence. CIA motto. The Looming Tower is a Pulitzer Prize-winning book published in 2006 by Lawrence Wright. The book explains the rise of al-Qaeda, the intelligence failures that led to 9/11, and the rivalry between the FBI and the CIA. While all three of these likely contributed to the events leading up to that terrible day, this paper will primarily focus on the CIA, since members of the FBI believe the attacks could have been prevented if the CIA had not withheld information. The question becomes, why did they withhold information? Was it due to corruption, incompetence, or arrogance? The 1990s were a period of heightened attacks of terrorism around the world. And just to be sure that I'm not frozen on your screen, I'm going to make sure that I have two. Yeah, there we go. The 1990s were a period of heightened attacks of terrorism around the world. It was also a period of significant allegations and scandals for the Clinton administration. The movie Wag the Dog is about political insiders who stage a fake war to distract from a presidential sex scandal. Art imitates life. Representative Tim Burchett recently reignited the comparison of Bill Clinton and the president in the movie when he retweeted Clinton's response to the shooting death of an ICE protester in Minneapolis. Bill Clinton, January 25th, said, "Over the course of a lifetime, we face only a few moments where the decisions we make and the actions we take will shape our history for years to come. This is one of them." Tim Burchett responds, "You bombed an aspirin factory to take your bad decisions out of the headlines. I'd sit this one out." Burchett was referring to the 1998 U.S. missile attack on a pharmaceutical company in retaliation for the al-Qaeda attacks on the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. The aspirin factory attack came on the same day that Monica Lewinsky testified before a grand jury, just 3 days after Clinton's televised admission of his relationship with Lewinsky. Many people believe Clinton ordered the strike in an attempt to steer attention away from the scandal. Wag the dog. By the time Bill was admitting to being a philandering liar, there had been about 7 major U.S.-related terrorist incidents during his time as president. In the 1960s, before his time as president, Bill Clinton was a college student at Georgetown University. It was there that he met Turki bin Faisal, who later became Prince Turki Al Faisal of Saudi Arabia. Turki came to America to attend school when he was 14 years old. When he was 19, while still in America, his father became king. At that time, Saudi Arabia was experiencing a period of turbulence, with concerns that the royal family might be overthrown due to the rise of Arab socialism. Mohammed bin Laden, a wealthy construction developer, offered financial support to the country to assist in its stabilization. In appreciation, Turkey's father, King Faisal, issued a royal decree granting bin Laden's construction company priority over major state contracts. This allowed the company to grow into a massive enterprise worth billions of dollars. The bond between the Faisal family and the bin Laden family was very strong. King Faisal's children would never forget what bin Laden had done for their father when he assumed the throne. Distraught by the events unfolding in his home country, Turki started missing classes. He made up the work in summer school, where Clinton helped coach him for an ethics test, which is ironic, considering. In 1993, New York Times article reported that Prince Turki and Bill Clinton stayed in touch. In a 2021 interview with CNBC, Prince Turki said that he considered Bill Clinton to be a friend. Prince Turki went on to serve as the head of the Saudi Arabian Intelligence Service from 1977 to 2001. The CIA worked closely with Prince Turki and were said to have been impressed with his insight, his knowledge, and familiarity with American customs. While some members of the CIA felt Turki was our man in Riyadh, others found him reluctant to share information. Prince Turki resigned as the head of Saudi intelligence on August 31st, 2001, just before the 9/11 attacks. Arming the enemy. The Soviet-Afghan War took place from 1979 to 1989. During the war, both the United States and Saudi Arabia provided funding and weapons to Afghan fighters to fight the Soviets who were backing Afghanistan's communist government for 10 years, beginning in 1979. The CIA ran a secret program called Operation Cyclone, which involved arming, financing, and providing training and logistical support to the Afghan fighters. It became one of the longest and most expensive covert operations in CIA history. So much money was spent on the operation that it is listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as most expensive covert action. Imagine if the Department of Government Efficiency had been formed in the 1970s. Would a Doge audit have revealed whether the $2 billion actually went to its intended purpose? In 1979, Osama bin Laden was a young Saudi from a wealthy construction family. After the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden became actively involved in supporting and joining the Afghan fighters. He began providing financial and logistical support to the Islamic fighters battling the Soviets. Twice a month, Prince Turki's chief of staff traveled to deliver cash to the Afghan fighters. The Saudi government contributed between $350 and $500 million per year to the Afghan resistance. Much of the money was deposited in Swiss bank accounts controlled by the United States. The CIA used the accounts to arm and train the fighters while keeping U.S. involvement secret. Saudi Arabia also contributed funds to the same accounts, allowing U.S. intelligence to coordinate the distribution while maintaining secrecy. Throughout this time, Osama bin Laden maintained his ties with Saudi Arabia. However, he grew critical of the monarchy when it allowed U.S. troops to be stationed in Saudi Arabia after the Gulf War in the early 1990s. He viewed the presence of foreign forces in the kingdom's holy cities as a betrayal of Islamic principles. In 1996, bin Laden publicly issued a religious ruling advising Muslims to oppose the Saudi government. This marked the beginning of his ideological break with the Saudi government. By the late 1990s, under Osama bin Laden's leadership, al-Qaeda began targeting U.S. interests and allies while increasingly criticizing the Saudi government. The United States' support of the Afghan fighters was intended to be used to fight the Soviets. At the time, the CIA must have believed it could fund and arm the Afghan fighters, aim them toward the Soviets, then step away. In hindsight, they actually created a version of the monster from Frankenstein. Fighters who were trained and armed to serve our interests later became part of the terrorist groups who targeted the United States. The counter-terrorist. Ramzi Youssef carried out the first large-scale Islamist attack on American soil when his bomb exploded in the basement of the World Trade Center in 1993. 6 people were killed. Over 1,000 were injured, but the towers did not fall. After the bombing, Ramzi Youssef fled the United States. 2 years later, Richard Clarke was serving as the National Coordinator for Counterterrorism when he discovered that Ramzi Youssef was in Islamabad. He contacted FBI headquarters and was connected to John O'Neill, a counterterrorism expert at the FBI. O'Neill had been the lead investigator in several terrorism investigations, including the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. After their connection over the location of Ramzi Youssef, John O'Neill joined a team of terrorism experts formed around Richard Clarke. Described as the spider in the web of agencies concerned with terrorism, Clarke was aware of anything that touched that web. His group, the Counterterrorism Security Group, consisted of members of the CIA, the National Security Council, and the Defense, Justice, and State Departments. John O'Neill was the only FBI representative in the group, despite the FBI's role as the primary domestic counterterrorism agency. Prior to publishing The Looming Tower, Lawrence Wright wrote a piece in The New Yorker titled The Counter-Terrorist. In describing the relationship between Richard Clarke and John O'Neill, Wright wrote, quote, Clarke immediately spotted in O'Neill an obsessiveness about the dangers of terrorism which mirrored his own. John had the same problems with the bureaucracy that I had, Clarke told me. Prior to September 11, a lot of people who were working full-time on terrorism thought it was no more than a nuisance. They didn't understand that al-Qaeda was enormously powerful and insidious, and that it was not going to stop until it really hurt us. John and some other senior officials knew that. The impatience really grew in us as we dealt with the dolts who didn't understand. End quote. O'Neill had repeatedly warned his supervisors that Osama bin Laden was the greatest threat to American national security. He insisted that bin Laden was capable of attacking us on American soil. A journalist who reviewed the book on John O'Neill concluded that either the government wasn't listening or they had a different agenda. In early 2000, the CIA learned that 2 al-Qaeda operatives had come to the United States. They failed to share that information with any other agency. Many in the CIA hated John O'Neill and felt that the FBI couldn't be trusted with sensitive intelligence. Some of O'Neill's subordinates strongly believed that the CIA was hiding information to keep O'Neill off the case. Others believed the CIA was shielding the operatives in the hope that they could recruit them, since the CIA was desperate for a source inside al-Qaeda. Once those operatives were in the United States, they would have fallen under the jurisdiction of the FBI. FBI agent Ali Soufan was the lead investigator of the USS Cole bombing. He has appeared in many interviews where he discusses his role in the FBI and the failures that occurred in the investigation of terrorism. In a 2018 video, Soufan said that the 9/11 attacks could have been prevented if the CIA had not withheld information.
17 years after 9/11, and we still have some missing links in this investigation. We still don't know why the information about these hijackers being here in the United States, at least 2 of them, 2 of the hijackers, Khalid al-Mihdar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, why that information was not shared with us. not shared with the FBI team investigating the USS Cole. Why 50 something people in the CIA read the cable about these guys being here in the United States, and they did not bother to tell State Department or the FBI or the Immigration and Naturalization Services.
The FBI had the authority to investigate the two men and learn what they were up to. But because the CIA didn't divulge their presence, the two men were permitted to develop their plot against America for 19 months. If the FBI had been made aware of their presence, they may have been able to prevent the attacks. In May 2001, 4 men were convicted in federal court in New York for their roles in the 1998 terrorist bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. The case was successful largely due to years of investigation by the FBI and the prosecution by the Southern District of New York under U.S. Attorney Mary Jo White, with her assistants Kenneth Karras and Patrick Fitzgerald. As that trial was ending, most of the 19 hijackers were already living in the United States. Unfortunately, their presence wasn't known in time to prevent the attacks. In June 2001, a CIA supervisor and FBI analysts went to New York to meet with agents working on the investigation into the bombing of the USS Cole. When the CIA supervisor displayed high-quality surveillance photographs of 2 al-Qaeda operatives, the FBI agents asked who they were and when and where the photos were taken. The photographs had been taken of al-Qaeda members at a meeting they attended in Malaysia, but the CIA supervisor refused to share that information with the FBI agents, who then became angry. They knew that the CIA was withholding information that would be useful to them in their investigations. Finally, the CIA supervisor provided one name, Khaled al-Mihdhar. 2 days after the meeting between the CIA supervisor and FBI analysts, Khaled al-Mihdhar received a new American visa from the consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Since the CIA had not given his name to the State Department to post to its watch list, Khaled al-Mihdhar arrived in New York on July 4th, 2001. The information concerning the photographs the CIA supervisor produced wasn't the only thing he kept from the FBI agents. A much more crucial photograph withheld from the agents was a photo of a man who went by the name Khalad. If that photograph had been provided, the agents investigating the USS Cole bombing would have recognized the man. Quote, by withholding the picture of Khalad standing beside the future hijackers, the CIA blocked the Bureau's investigation into the Cole attack and allowed the 9/11 plot to proceed. In 2018, Hulu released a mini-series based on the book The Looming Tower. The series underscores the monumental and inexcusable mistakes made by our intelligence agencies, particularly the CIA. It also provides a biographical story of John O'Neill and his role in fighting terrorism. Agent John O'Neill retired from the FBI in August 2001. On August 23rd, he began his new role as Director of Security for the World Trade Center. In a cruel twist of fate, John O'Neill was killed in the 9/11 attacks at the World Trade Center. The warnings. During the spring and summer of 2001, U.S. intelligence agencies received a stream of warnings that al-Qaeda planned something very, very, very big. CIA Director George Tenet told the 9/11 Commission after the 9/11 attacks that, quote, the system was blinking red. He wrote in the New Yorker, quote, meanwhile, intelligence had been streaming in concerning a likely al-Qaeda attack. It all came together in the 3rd week in June. The CIA's view was that a major terrorist attack was coming in the next several weeks. On July 5th, Clark summoned all the domestic security agencies, Federal Aviation Administration, Coast Guard, Customs, Immigration Naturalization Service, and the FBI, and told them to increase their security in light of a pending attack, end quote. The August 6th, 2001 presidential daily brief was titled, Bin Laden determined to strike in U.S. It confirmed that reporting on the threat of an attack had been corroborated, including a report that bin Laden wanted to hijack a U.S. aircraft. FBI information indicated patterns of suspicious activity consistent with preparations for hijackings or other types of attacks, including recent surveillance of federal buildings. The CIA and FBI were investigating a call that was received in May at the U.S. Embassy in the United Arab Emirates that bin Laden supporters were in the U.S. and were planning attacks with explosives. 15 of the 19 hijackers obtained visas, allowing them into America from the U.S. consulate in Jeddah and the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, between 1997 and 2001. CIA station chiefs are usually classified information, but due to his promotional roles in the CIA, it's become public knowledge that John Brennan was the station chief in Saudi Arabia from 1996 to 1999. After leaving that post, Brennan became chief of staff to the CIA director, George Tenet. While researching this paper, I finally got around to watching Tucker Carlson's series on 9/11. They're worth watching and cover a lot of the same ground I cover here. They should be required watching for all Americans. There is a lot of good information in Tucker's series, but the one part that stood out to me came in part 4.
What role did John Brennan play in facilitating the attacks? Why did he seem to be working for the hijackers? What CIA official made the decision to attempt to recruit those hijackers? What role did John Brennan play in facilitating the attacks? Why did he seem to be working for the hijackers? What CIA official made the decision to attempt to recruit those hijackers? What role did John Brennan play in facilitating the attacks? Why did he seem to be working for the hijackers?
Going to be longer. Sorry, guys.
What CIA official made the decision to attempt to recruit those hijackers?
Okay. Anyway, that was really short. Saudi Arabia. In August 2025, a federal judge ruled that a civil lawsuit brought by the survivors of 9/11 victims against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will be allowed to move forward. The lawsuit was first filed in 2003 and alleges that the kingdom sponsored, aided, and supported the al-Qaeda hijackers. Saudi Arabia has denied those claims. This lawsuit deserves its own chapter, but it was important for me to mention in order to bring Saudi Arabia back into the picture. In late 2017, a royal decree was issued in Saudi Arabia for the creation of an anti-corruption committee. Hundreds of people, including members of the royal family, current and former government officials, and prominent businessmen, were detained. Saudi authorities believe that at least $100 billion had been misused through systematic corruption and embezzlement over several decades. The story is referred to as the 2017 Saudi Arabian Purge and references corruption as the leading cause, although links to money laundering and terrorism have also been mentioned. Saudi Arabia has struggled with allegations that the Saudi government was linked to terrorism, and some Saudi banks have been funding terrorists. A $4.2 billion lawsuit was filed in New York in 2002 against 2 of Saudi Arabia's largest banks, along with companies affiliated with the bin Laden family in connection with the 9/11 attacks. The banks were cleared by a U.S. court in 2018, but portions of that decision were overturned by a federal appeals court following the lawsuit to be reinstated. Saudi Arabia was a key U.S. ally in the Middle East. Suggesting Saudi involvement in the 9/11 attacks at the time could have severely and negatively impacted the relationship between our two countries, since intelligence suggested possible links of Saudi involvement, but not absolute proof. The 9/11 Commission withheld 28 pages from a classified 2002 congressional report. In 2016, the 28 pages were partially declassified. The pages were withheld from the public for years. over concerns of national security and potential damage to diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia. The 28 pages are significant because they suggest that some Saudi individuals may have provided support to the 9/11 hijackers, raising questions about potential foreign government connections to the attacks. While an official list of detainees from the purge has never been released by Saudi Arabia, some are listed on the purge Wikipedia page. When comparing the names referenced in the now declassified 28 pages with those of individuals detained during the purge, there appears to be some overlap. For example, certain Saudi business leaders detained during the purge appear to be associated with businesses mentioned in the 28 pages. Individuals linked to the Saudi Royal Navy are also referenced in the 28 pages, while senior Saudi naval commanders were among those reportedly detained. In addition, some defendants that are named in ongoing civil lawsuits brought by families of 9/11 victims are also mentioned in the 28 pages. Is it possible that the purge involved not only general corruption, but also corruption directly connected to the 9/11 attacks? If banks, business leaders, and government officials were somehow connected to 9/11, would the Saudi government want to hold those people accountable? Wouldn't it be great if the $107 billion, 107 billion, recovered by the Saudi Anti-Corruption Committee was set aside as a settlement for the victims' families? The road to 9/11 is not a direct one. There are many intersections, off-ramps, and dead ends, and confusing terrain. The amount of investigation needed into what happened leading up to that day are bigger than anyone can comprehend. If an FBI investigation was undertaken to understand and prove who was behind terrorism, it's no surprise it has taken so many years. There are still so many questions to which we may never get answers. Perhaps the most important question is, why did the CIA withhold information from the FBI and other intelligence agencies? Was it because of corruption, incompetence, or arrogance? And with that, let's move on to Chapter 3. And don't forget, my friends, dawnbillie.substack.com. dawnbillie.substack.com. Furthermore, go to tulipblooms.shop. The Mother's Day baskets. Savings, savings, savings. Up to 30%, guys. Get the gift your mother's always wanted. tulipblooms.shop. Promo code Shapiro. Chapter 3. The Minnesota Connection. The single largest funder of Al-Shabaab is the taxpayers of Minnesota. Senator Ted Cruz. The subject of this paper was not what I originally had in mind when I started researching the next chapter of All Roads Lead to 9/11. A brief mention of Somalia in a declassified document grew into an idea that had to be pursued, so here we are. The recent drama in Minnesota and its connection to Somalia uncovered a relationship to 9/11 that could no longer be ignored. As I've said before, the road to 9/11 is not a direct path. And Minnesota is the latest detour. The arrest of Zacarias Moussaoui, known as the 20th hijacker in August 2001, is probably the most obvious connection between Minnesota and 9/11 and the story that most people probably remember. A manager at a suburban Minneapolis flight school became suspicious of Moussaoui after he made several unusual requests. The school used flight simulators, and its training programs were designed for newly hired airline pilots or as a refresher course for active pilots. Moussaoui didn't fit either of those profiles. In fact, he didn't have a pilot's license or any background in aviation. When the manager learned that Moussaoui was only interested in takeoffs and landings, understanding the computerized flight system and how the aircraft doors operated, he became increasingly concerned. In addition, because this type of training is usually paid for by an airline pilot's employer, the manager grew further concerned when Moussaoui paid about $9,000 in cash for the course. After Moussaoui completed just 2 days of classroom instruction and a single flight simulator session, the manager contacted the FBI. Within 30 minutes of receiving the telephone call, the Minneapolis FBI opened an intelligence investigation of Moussaoui. When FBI agents discovered that he had entered the United States on a French passport, they contacted INS. After review, it was determined that Moussaoui had overstayed his visa and was subject to arrest on immigration charges. Moussaoui was arrested on August 16, 2001. He refused to allow a search of his hotel room or laptop. Bureaucracy, like the ridiculous wall between agencies, lack of information sharing, and legal restraints prevented the agents from obtaining the necessary search warrants, FISA authorizations, and support from their management. Reading through this section of the OIG report, it's hard to ignore the urgency and frustration felt by members of law enforcement who were involved in the Moussaoui case. They clearly had a gut instinct that something was amiss. By this time, intelligence agencies were aware that hijackings were a possible terror threat, yet a supervisor at the FBI said of Moussaoui, quote, "You have a guy interested in this type of aircraft. That is it." The OIG report stated that the information provided from Minneapolis was, quote, "quickly and inappropriately dismissed as incomplete and its concerns as far-fetched." According to the Washington Post, a Minneapolis FBI agent wrote to a colleague on September 10th, 2001, that he was, quote, "so desperate to get into Moussaoui's computer, he would take anything." It was clear that he knew there was more to Moussaoui than his interest in airplanes. The 9/11 Commission labeled Zacarias Moussaoui as, quote, "an al-Qaeda mistake and a missed opportunity." It doesn't take much to reach the conclusion that had the Minneapolis FBI been allowed to search Moussaoui's computer and detain him on suspicion of terrorist activity, the events of September 11th, 2001 may have been dramatically different. While Moussaoui's connection to Minnesota via the flight school is interesting, it isn't the main reason that I veered off in my research. After all, Moussaoui isn't a Somali refugee, and the road I was on led to Somalia and the related financial fraud in Minnesota. The reference to Somalia that caught my attention appeared in a 2002 congressional report that I mentioned in a previous paper. The report consists of 28 pages of classified material that summarized intelligence leads about possible Saudi-linked connections to the 9/11 hijackers in an effort to protect Saudi Arabia. It was excluded from the 9/11 Commission investigation and remained classified until 2016. That report contained references to Somali nonprofit organizations. Quote, FBI agents believed at the time that these subjects were laundering money through this mosque first to Somali nonprofit organizations and then to other entities affiliated with Osama bin Laden. Quote, based on interviews and review of FBI files, San Diego FBI agents believed at the time that these subjects were laundering money. Quote, in approximately 1998, the FBI became aware of millions of dollars in wire transfers from the Somali community in San Diego to Al Barakat Trading Company and other businesses affiliated with Osama bin Laden. At the time, the funding appeared to be originating from the local Somali community in the form of donations to various Somali nonprofits. End quote. The recent news of Somali-linked fraud in Minnesota is not new. The transfer of millions of dollars from the Somali community by way of nonprofits in the United States to organizations tied to terrorism has been happening for decades. A November 19th, 2025 City Journal article alleged that, quote, millions of dollars from Minnesota state welfare programs had ultimately landed in the hands of the terror group Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab is a Somali-based Islamist terror group and an affiliate of Al-Qaeda since 2012. So, an affiliate of Al-Qaeda, the same group responsible for 9/11, is receiving millions of dollars from American taxpayers. Have we been funding our own demise? According to multiple law enforcement sources, Minnesota's Somali community has sent millions of dollars through a network of hawalas, informal money transfer middlemen that move money. Some of that money has ended up in the hands of al-Shabaab. Quote, according to Glenn Kearns, a retired Seattle Police Department detective who spent 14 years on a federal joint terrorism task force, the Somalis ran a sophisticated money network spanning from Seattle to Minneapolis and were routing significant amounts of cash on commercial flights from the Seattle airport to the Hawala networks in Somalia. One of these networks, Kearns discovered, sent $20 million abroad in a single year. The amount of money was staggering, Kearns said. End quote. When Kearns's investigation expanded to Minnesota, he, quote, pulled all of their records and, well, shit, all these Somalis sending out money are on DHS benefits. The funds were intended to be used for Minnesota's Housing Stabilization Services, HSS, program. Minnesota's HSS program is the first of its kind in the country and was intended to help seniors, addicts, the disabled, the mentally ill, to give them secure housing. The program receives funding through Minnesota's Medicaid system, combining both state and federal contributions, with the federal portion representing the majority of funding. Instead of helping Americans in need, significant funds were being sent to al-Shabaab networks in Somalia. In November 2025, House Majority Whip Tom Emmer sent a letter to Minnesota's U.S. Attorney urging him to open an investigation into reports that taxpayer dollars were ending up in the hands of al-Shabaab terrorists in Somalia. Emmer stressed that this fraud represents not only an extreme betrayal of taxpayer trust, but also a grave threat to our national security. Emmer isn't the only official drawing attention to this problem. In December, CBS News reported that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced his department's investigation into allegations that tax dollars may have been diverted to al-Shabaab. Nick Shirley's video the day after Christmas reporting on fraud in Minnesota only fueled the flames of investigations that were already underway. Kash Patel reported that the FBI had surged personnel and resources to Minnesota to dismantle large-scale fraud schemes exploiting federal programs. He added that, quote, the FBI believes this is just the tip of a very large iceberg. None of this is new. Years of investigation began with the $300 million scheme at the nonprofit Feeding Our Future, for which dozens of defendants in Minnesota have been indicted and convicted. Prosecutors said the organization was at the center of the country's largest COVID-related fraud scam when defendants exploited a state-run, federally funded program intended to provide food for children. A federal prosecutor alleged earlier in December that more than half of the roughly $18 billion in federal funds that supported programs in Minnesota may have been stolen. Most of the defendants are Somali. Senator Ted Cruz said in a Fox and Friends interview that the Minnesota taxpayer had become the single largest source of funding for al-Shabaab.
I'll give you an amazing stat. Al-Shabaab, the radical Islamic terror group in Somalia, do you know who the single largest donor, the single largest source of funds to them was?
The Somalis in Minnesota?
The Minnesota taxpayers.
The fraud story and its potential link to terrorism was buried under the noise of ICE protesters and the deportation of illegal immigrants. Operation Metro Surge began in December 2025 as the largest immigration enforcement operation ever carried out by the Department of Homeland Security. For weeks, we were force-fed a non-stop diet of protests, idiocy, and criminal behavior as members of our law enforcement were harassed and assaulted for doing their job. The onslaught of idiocy by our fellow citizens protecting people they have no business protecting revealed their ignorance in understanding what is at stake for our country. Protesters showed up from across the country as the number of federal ICE agents increased. Governor Tim Walz claimed that 2,000 federal officers had arrived and weren't coordinating with Minnesota's government, saying it was all a show for cameras. He may have been right. Although necessary, were the ICE agents in Minnesota there to distract us from something greater than illegal immigration? Is it possible that instead of just deporting people who had overstayed their welcome, potential terrorists were taken into custody? Tucked into news articles covering the immigration arrests and deportations were stories of agents from Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, dispatched to Minnesota. Quote, one former law enforcement official described the scale as extraordinary, noting that the number of HSI agents being sent to Minneapolis is roughly equivalent to the entire HSI workforce assigned to the state of Arizona. The Who We Are page on the HSI website states, quote, HSI protects what matters most, our country, our people, and our future. What makes us unique is the global nature of the crimes we investigate and the broad legal authorities available to us to combat them, end quote. It seemed strange to me that seemingly out of nowhere, Minnesota drew the short straw for deportation activity. Were we distracted by ICE and by the fools following them around while a much bigger operation was underway? The media focus was centered around deportation efforts more than anything else. We were assaulted daily by videos of protesters harassing law enforcement. Sad stories of people who'd been detained filled the news. The fraud that had been uncovered seemed to be a background story for the media. Commander Greg Bovino showed up at the scene and entertained us with videos of him speaking to idiots, including those in Minnesota's government. His appearance caused a lot of hand-wringing and pearl-clutching by people who were unaccustomed to seeing law enforcement enforcing the law. What else was happening while we were focused on Commander Bovino? In order to deter protesters from interfering with their work, stories began popping up of ICE agents turning the tables on the protesters and following them to their houses. A video of ICE agents driving circles around a roundabout while protesters follow them like cats chasing a laser light were comical. What else was happening while the protesters were driving in circles? Tom Homan came in and made the rounds with the media with his no-nonsense style, setting the record straight that he was there to get the job done, and just like that, the story was over. At least the deportation story was over, but the fraud investigation and its link to terrorism continues. Just as what is alleged in Minnesota, Al-Qaeda moved money through nonprofits and hawalas before 9/11. Following the attacks, the investigation into Al-Qaeda's funding took off. U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald, who represented James Comey this past September, was instrumental in prosecuting members of Al-Qaeda. He also took the lead into the investigation of the funding and financial support that enabled the 9/11 attacks. This included the investigation into a major contributor to Al-Qaeda, the Benevolence International Foundation, BIF. BIF was a Chicago-based nonprofit started around 1987 by a Saudi national and included branches in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Its stated purpose was humanitarian Islamic charity helping orphans, widows, and refugees. After 9/11, intelligence reporting and financial records suggested BIF was secretly supporting Al-Qaeda. In December 2001, U.S. authorities raided BIF's Chicago offices, where they found videos and literature glorifying martyrdom. BIF's bank accounts were blocked by the U.S. Treasury Department in January 2002, and the following October, the foundation's executive director was charged with conspiracy to provide material support to terrorists. A 2002 press release from Fitzgerald's office announcing the indictment of Biff's director describes a criminal enterprise that used charitable contributions from unsuspecting Americans to support al-Qaeda. Is that similar to what is happening in Minnesota? In the 9/11 case, the government initially pursued a terrorism case, but shifted to fraud after the court limited the use of terrorism-related evidence. By contrast, in Minnesota, while terrorism concerns have been suggested, that investigation is ongoing and fraud charges are being prioritized. Is this what is needed to pursue terrorism charges? First, they focus on funding, and terrorism charges will be added later. In a declassified memorandum from January 2004, Patrick Fitzgerald said he believed terrorists were raising substantial funds in the United States. More than 2 decades later, we may be witnessing his prediction come true. He went on to describe what we may now be seeing in Minnesota. Funds are sent overseas through a charity and diverted to terrorist organizations. Fitzgerald said that bringing criminal prosecutions based on terrorist financing is very difficult. To make a material support case, records must be obtained from overseas to reflect where the money is going. Funds are often dispersed in cash, making tracing the funds virtually impossible. Is it safe to assume that over the past 2 decades, the method for tracing money through hawalas to Somalia may have improved? If that's the case, were Minnesota government officials aware that funds were being sent to Somalia? If so, could those officials be held responsible for providing material support to al-Shabaab? Keep that thought in mind while you watch this exchange between Minnesota AG Keith Ellison and Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ellison, let me start with you. You're the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. Do I have that correct? That's a yes?
Sir, you're aware of my job. You know the answer to that.
You're not going to answer my questions? Are we going to start this way? Are you the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, yes or no?
You know the answer.
Mr. Ellison, you're in my courtroom now. You're under oath. So I suggest that you answer my questions. You the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the state of Minnesota, yes or no? Let's try another question. Are you familiar with the $9 billion in historic fraud out of your state, including the $250 million in the Feeding Our Future program alone? You familiar with that? Don't turn to the pages in your book to get your potted answers. Are you familiar with it? Yes or no?
Yes, I am familiar with it.
Very familiar, aren't you? Because the people who ran the Feeding Our Futures program came to you in your official office in the state capitol December 11th, 2021, and asked for your help in getting investigators off their backs. They complained to you for upwards of an hour about state investigators going after them, and they begged you to help them, and you agreed to it, amazingly. And we know you did.
That's not
because
true.
It's all caught on tape.
Yeah,
every single sentence is caught on tape. Here's what you said. Let's take a look. You said, it's not a question. You said to them, send me the names of all these folks who are investigating them. You said to them, send me their names. And I'll take that list and I'll call the person over at Education who's investigating them and say, what's going on? Why am I getting these complaints? Then you went on to say, I already have my team working on this. What day should we get together to discuss it again? You made pledge after pledge to them. You said, we've got to make sure this guy who's investigating them stops it. You said, you have my attention. I'm concerned about this. You said, let's go fight these people, meaning the people who were investigating the fraud. Why'd you do it? Why'd you help them?
Are you going to let me answer?
Please, we're all ears.
So first of all, you're cherry picking quotes out of there.
Why did you help them?
I thought you were going to let me answer.
Why did you
help them? Are you going to let me answer?
Why did you help
You
them?
let me answer and I'll answer you.
Tell the truth and I'll let you answer.
I will tell the truth.
Good.
Let's do that.
That'd be a nice change. Why'd you help them?
Now see, Mr. Chairman, I didn't come here to be insulted. I came here voluntarily.
You came here for the truth. Let's have it. Why did you help them? The quotes are here. They're in black and white, and every member of this audience can listen to the recording. It's 54 minutes long. It's all in public. You can Google it right now and listen to it.
And listen to it all.
Why'd you help them?
First of all, I didn't help them.
You did help them.
No, I did not. I certainly didn't.
You're saying you didn't do anything for them. You didn't.
Well, wait a minute.
I already have my team working on this again. That's not you.
I have my team assisted with the information that led to the prosecution and conviction of these people.
No, you didn't. You didn't lift
Yes,
a finger
we
to
did.
prosecute them. No, you did not. You
No,
didn't
because
lift a
it
finger
was
to
a
prosecute
federal
them. You had,
prosecution.
BS. You had
Okay.
whistleblowers
Well,
come to you as early as 2019.
You're the one talking BS.
Hey, listen, it's my time.
Doesn't know what you're talking about,
Oh,
sir.
no, sir. You
You're the
now have
one
encountered the truth and you don't like it.
cherry-picking
Why'd you take their
You're the
money?
one taking their
Why'd you
money.
take their money?
I didn't.
You took
No, that's a false statement.
$10,000.
No, that's a false statement. That is a false
$10,000
statement.
9 days after the meeting.
False statement.
You took $10,000. Here's what
Untrue.
happened. They went to your office.
That's a
They
false
solicited
statement.
money from
They
you.
did
They
not come to
solicited
my
help
office.
from you.
That's also wrong.
They came to your office.
No,
It
they
was your
didn't.
official office. You
No, they
met with them
didn't.
for 54 minutes.
No, they
They
didn't.
asked you for help. You pledged it to them, and they talked repeatedly about money. In fact, it's all they talked
That's
about.
a lie.
Money, 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 money. They
True.
said, we
Untrue.
will put our dollars in the right place. We will support candidates that will fight to protect our interests. You replied, that's right. They said,
Oh,
if you are
that is
securing
not
your
true.
donor base and securing your power base, you can act the way you want. You replied, money is freedom. They said the amount of money circulating, I'm reading the transcript. The amount of money
No, you're
circulating in our community
misreading the
today is
transcript.
powerful, and we haven't realizing it in a meaningful way. And you said, give me the specifics. And 9 days
Sir,
later, you took $10,000
That's a lie.
from people who were then indicted. It's in your reports. Why'd
Sir,
you do it?
Sir,
Was it worth it?
You know what? This is a theatrical
10,000.
performance.
This is the truth.
It
This is
has
what
nothing to
accountability
do-
looks like, of which you've had none.
No.
You helped fraudsters defraud your
Lie.
state and this government of $9
Sir,
billion, and
sir,
you got a
this is-
fat campaign contribution out of it. You ought to be indicted.
True. Well,
That's the truth.
I think we've made the point. Let's keep the tenor
Well,
just a
for the
little more
record,
calm.
Oh, I'll ask how I want
he's
to, Senator
lying,
Paul.
and that's the truth.
Oh no, this is all on the record,
no, sir.
Did you bother
You
to?
are-
Did you bother to investigate where the money that you facilitated their fraud for, where it went? Do you know where it went? What it was used for? The fraudulent money? I do, because we just heard testimony about it yesterday.
Because we
The
were
funds
key
went to
players in the
hundreds of millions of
investigation.
dollars to terrorist
we
groups,
do
to
know.
transnational criminal organizations, to the drug trade, to drug trafficking, to child trafficking. And you took $10,000
That's a lie.
and helped them do it. You know, the other thing is,
Untrue statement.
whistleblowers came to you as early as 2019. Let's look. As early as
This is
2019,
this is
whistleblower. Don't talk over me.
No,
As
no,
early
you're
as
talking over me.
2019, it's my hearing, pal. As early as
I'm not your pal.
2019,
Don't call me pal.
whistleblowers came to, well, I should call you prisoner because you ought to be in jail.
Well, see what you can
In
do about it.
2019, whistleblowers came to you in your office and referred to you fraud allegations from Feeding Our Futures, and you blew them off. Listen, your own state newspaper
That's a
investigated
lie.
it. The Minnesota Star Tribune, the Partners in Nutrition, brought its concerns to the Attorney General's office in 2018 and in 2019, and you did nothing. You did
My-
nothing for years. The
This-
only action you took is,
False statement.
once all these fraudsters came to your office
It is a
and
false
asked you to get involved
statement.
and offered you money,
Did not come to
then
my
you got
office.
involved.
They
Then
did
you
not-
took the money,
they-
and then you got involved.
They did not come to my office. You're completely wrong about
You
that.
met with
I
them
did
for
not take anybody's
54
money.
minutes, and you took $10,000, and they also gave your family money. They gave your family thousands of dollars in campaign contributions in addition to what they
this is a
gave
false
you.
statement.
Let's put the put
This is,
sign
this
back
is
up.
completely
The
untrue.
New York Post.
Yeah, we know the New York Post.
Minnesota Keith Ellison, AG, accepted campaign donations from individuals linked to the $250 million COVID fraud scheme after they were in your office.
Not,
The donations came on December 20th.
sir,
You
this
met
is
with them
not-
on December the 11th, and on January 20th, the FBI knocked over their headquarters.
No.
That's the sequence of events here.
No, it's not.
You've
the
been
sequence
right
of
at the
events.
center of this fraud
not
thing
the
from the
sequence of
beginning,
events.
and
It's
you've
untrue.
enabled it. And sir,
The false
you
statement.
should resign.
And sir, you should resign. I was thinking the same thing about
You
you.
should resign.
You,
Thank you,
I was
Mr.
thinking
Chairman.
the exact same thing about you.
I'm sure after encountering this
yeah.
truth, you are, because it hurts to
because
have accountability, doesn't it?
Because after this parade
It
of
hurts to have
lies and
accountability.
presentation,
Time has
I think you should be
expired.
ashamed for misrepresentation.
In September 2016, law professor Jimmy Gurule spoke before the Notre Dame Alumni Association. Gurule served as the Undersecretary of Enforcement with the Treasury Department during the 9/11 attacks. In his presentation, he succinctly stated, terrorists need money to terrorize. With al-Qaeda, they were funded almost exclusively through external donors, using charities as a front to raise money. The Treasury Department began looking at ways to track the money, trace it, and block it to prevent it from going into the hands of al-Qaeda. Does our current Treasury Department have the ability to track the money that has been sent out of Minnesota. Gurule played several important roles in establishing guidelines to combat terrorism funding. Parts of his counter-terrorist financing strategy have been adopted as U.S. policy. Among other things, one of the most relevant things Gurule emphasized was the importance of following the money from charities and hawalas. Doing so would disrupt terrorist operations before attacks occur. Is this what happened in Minnesota? Is the government capable of following the money in ways that weren't available prior to 9/11? The Treasury Department and DOJ routinely use tools that reflect Gurule's strategy of targeting charities or NGOs suspected of funneling money to terrorist groups. Were those strategies used in the investigation into Somali charities linked to al-Shabaab? One of those strategies may very well be encouraging whistleblowers to come forward. On February 13th, 2026, the Treasury Department announced that it would start accepting whistleblower tips on fraud, money laundering, and sanctions violations. These tips will result in financial rewards for eligible whistleblower tips. Quote, President Trump has been clear that Americans have a right to know that their tax dollars are not being diverted to fund acts of global terror. End quote. Somalia-born Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar once said, "Some people did something," when referring to the tragic events of 9/11. Reading through her entire speech, I felt she was speaking as a Muslim woman from Somalia, not an American. Rather than speaking as a proud American, hoping for the rest of us to love and respect people of other faiths, she belittles and undermines the tragedy that our country, her adopted country, felt on September 11th. It's unacceptable. Islamist, terrorist Somalis hate us. Were the Somalis who were invited into our country properly vetted, considering that so many took advantage of our good nature? It's hard not to question if they came here to do us harm, to destroy us from within. In January, President Trump announced that his administration would end the temporary protected status for immigrants from Somalia on March 17th, 2026. TPS allows some people from Somalia to stay in the U.S. and work legally on a temporary basis. This status will not be extended. President Trump wrote, quote, Somali gangs are terrorizing the people of that great state and billions of dollars are missing. Send them back to where they came from. It's over. There have been many times that President Trump has read The Snake. He usually reads it in the context of our borders as a whole. Researching this paper led me to the conclusion that his reading of The Snake fits perfectly with the people of Somalia who have taken advantage of us and our country. You knew damn well I was a snake before you took me in.
It's called The Snake. On her way to work one morning, down the path along the lake, a tender-hearted woman saw a poor, half-frozen snake. His pretty colored skin had been all frosted with the dew. Poor thing, she cried, I'll take you in, and I'll take care of you. The border. Take me in, oh tender woman. Take me in, for heaven's sake. Take me in, oh tender woman, sighed the vicious snake. She wrapped him up all cozy in a comforter of silk and laid him by her fireside with some honey and some milk. She hurried home from work that night, and as soon as she arrived, she found that pretty snake she'd taken in had been revived. Take me in, oh tender woman. Take me in, for heaven's sake. Take me in, oh tender woman, sighed that vicious snake. She clutched him to her bosom. You're so beautiful, she cried. But if I hadn't brought you in, by now, oh heavens, you would have died. She stroked his pretty skin again and kissed him and held him tight. But instead of saying thank you, that snake gave her a vicious bite. Take me in, O tender woman. Take me in for heaven's sake. Take me in, O tender woman, sighed the vicious snake. I have saved you, cried the woman, and you've bitten me, heavens, why? You know your bite is poisonous, and now I'm going to die. Oh, shut up, silly woman, said the reptile with a grin. You knew damn well I was a snake before you took me in.
And now, chapter 4. But before we get to that, don't forget tulipblooms.shop. That's tulipblooms.shop. The amazing Mother's Day blowout. Get 3 or more items for your Mother's Day basket, an extra 10% off. You get 4 or more, 15% off. 5 or more, it is 20% off. tulipblooms.shop. Another 10% off with promo code Shapiro. Don't wait. tulipblooms.shop. Take advantage now, guys. All right. Now, back to donbilly.substack.com. And now, chapter 4. They knew. So it is said that if you know your enemies and you know yourself, you will win 100 times in 100 battles. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Of all the roads that led to 9/11, none was more consequential than the bombing of the USS Cole in October of 2000. If the government agencies tasked with protecting us had worked together in the aftermath of that attack, the events that changed our country following the following September may have been avoided. After 9/11, much of the blame was unfairly placed on the FBI. In truth, the blame was shared across 2 presidential administrations, the CIA, the State Department, and other agencies whose failures made the attack possible. 17 U.S. Navy soldiers were killed and 37 injured after a dinghy carrying al-Qaeda suicide bombers approached the Navy ship that had been docked for refueling at a port in Aden, Yemen. Almost 26 years later, one of the alleged masterminds of the USS Cole bombing plot is still held at Guantanamo Bay. The Hulu miniseries, The Looming Tower, follows 2 central figures, former FBI agents John O'Neill and Ali Soufan, in the investigation of the attack on the USS Cole. Both played crucial roles in the investigation, although their paths led to very different outcomes. John O'Neill left the FBI to take on a new position as Director of Security at the World Trade Center. In a tragic twist, after spending nearly a decade investigating terrorism, he was killed in the September 11th attacks only weeks after his retirement. Ali Soufan, who worked closely with O'Neill in the FBI's counterterrorism unit, remained with the Bureau until his resignation in 2005. Prior to reading The Looming Tower, Ali Soufan was not someone of interest in my research on 9/11. He has since become one of my favorite characters in this story. It was his dedication to his job, to the rule of law, and his desire to protect our country that was most admirable. When he came to the realization that some of the agencies he was working alongside didn't hold the same values, it was heartbreaking. Ali Soufan was born in 1971 in Lebanon and spent his childhood in Beirut during the country's civil war. He came to the United States in 1987 when he was 16 years old. A consistent theme in his story is his belief that America's strength comes from its commitment to justice and to the rule of law. Coming from a very different background, Ali was fascinated by the protections the U.S. Constitution provides its citizens. But it wasn't his respect for the law or his admiration for our legal system that motivated him to apply to the FBI. That decision came from a bet with his frat brothers that someone like him could actually be hired by the FBI. No one was more surprised than he when he received the call with the job offer. Ali stood out early in his career. He stayed current on events in the Middle East and kept up to speed on his Arabic by reading newspapers from the region. Over time, he began to notice that Osama bin Laden's name kept showing up in press reports. It became clear that bin Laden's declarations toward the United States were growing increasingly aggressive, and he was becoming dangerous. Concerned, Ali wrote a memo outlining who Osama bin Laden was and recommended that the FBI focus on the threat he posed to the United States. After giving his memo to a supervisor, it was passed on to the I-49 squad, the unit responsible for investigating terrorist groups. Ali would later become a key figure in the FBI's counterterrorism unit, particularly investigations involving Al-Qaeda. Ali Soufan's memoir, The Black Banners, follows his career and provides first-hand accounts of investigations he was involved in surrounding terrorist organizations. The book includes details of the USS Cole bombing and the investigation that followed leading up to and after the attacks of September 11th. He also provides insight into the enhanced interrogation techniques, torture, that was used by the CIA contractors on high-value detainees after 9/11. Interestingly, one of the central themes of the book is the conflict that developed between the FBI and the CIA in their investigations into terrorism. There are two versions of The Black Banners, a heavily redacted version and a declassified version. The redacted version of the audiobook was my first introduction to The Black Banners. It starts out with an important note concerning the text, where Ali explains that in addition to his own self-censorship to protect names, sources, and methods, a required government review took place after the manuscript was finished. After Ali made the revisions that were requested by the FBI, the Bureau approved the book for publication with the stipulation that the CIA would also conduct a review. This was a strange requirement since Ali had never reported to the CIA. Although there was no reason for a second pre-publication review, Ali had to wait for their approval. After a series of delays, Ali received two separate responses following the CIA's review. The first contained a list of concerns the CIA had regarding chapters 1 through 15. The second contained a list of concerns regarding chapters 16 through the end of the book. Ali sent a response to the FBI saying that the concerns the CIA addressed were unnecessary since the topics covered were either already public, declassified, or didn't qualify as classified material. In response, the CIA rescinded their request and issued an even more extensive set of redactions. The new redactions went beyond classification guidelines and ranged from the ridiculous to the absurd. For example, one redaction censored part of a public exchange between Ali and a senator that had already been broadcast live on national television. How could that be considered classified material? Since he had already committed to a publication date with his publishers, Ali reluctantly published the manuscript with the CIA redactions. He hoped that the blocked out portions of text wouldn't prevent readers from understanding the context of the book. Ali also asked the FBI to re-examine the CIA's concerns and reject them. And failing that, he intended to pursue legal action to force the release of the redacted information. The redactions imposed by the CIA fit snugly into the puzzle that I've been piecing together. Rather than frustrate the reader, the redactions only solidify the feeling that we're not being told the truth. What was the CIA trying to hide, and why? The audiobook includes sections that sound like this. Blank was in a jubilant mood. Blank had actionable intelligence. Blank waited in the office. It was almost comical of how ridiculous it was. Blank told blank that blank had blank blank redacted. At times, it sounded as though blank was referring to Ali himself. Instead of I walked into the room, the redaction said blank walked into the room. Some redactions seemed to only block out pronouns. Instead of Jim said he would go, the redactions would read Jim said blank would go. What was the purpose of the redactions? Were they trying to deter Ali from publishing his book? The ridiculousness of the redactions made the CIA look foolish, petty, and suspicious. Instead of discouraging me, it actually convinced me to purchase the declassified version of the book. In the foreword of the declassified book, Ali writes that the CIA recognized that its redactions were unwarranted and reversed its decision. This was clear government bureaucracy at its worst, and it only heightened suspicion about the CIA's actions. Ali writes in detail about the October 2000 attack on the USS Cole. The FBI's New York office was tasked with leading the investigation, and a decision was needed on who would represent the office. Assistant U.S. Attorneys Patrick Fitzgerald and David Kelly were consulted, since they would be handling the prosecutions. Both attorneys wanted Ali Soufan on the team. Ali became lead investigator on the USS Cole bombing, working in Yemen as part of the Corps investigative team. When Ali first heard of the Cole bombing, he questioned why a Navy ship was in Yemen. It was well known in the intelligence community that Yemen was full of radical Islamists, including al-Qaeda. It was also well known that the Yemeni government looked the other way when it came to terrorist activity. In the past, Djibouti served as the refueling port for U.S. ships, but because of an ongoing war, it had become a less favorable option. In January 1999, Aden, Yemen was chosen to replace it, even though intelligence reports still ranked Yemen as a greater risk than Djibouti. The real reason for the change was that the Clinton administration was trying to improve relations between the United States and Yemen. Allowing U.S. ships to dock there provided economic benefits to the country, and the State Department felt that security was acceptable. In a review following the attack, Ali determined that the sailors and the captain of the USS Cole had done everything they could under the circumstances. Quote, the fact that the Cole was a sitting duck and identified as such by the terrorists was the fault of those responsible for designating Aden a safe port, end quote. It is worth mentioning again that according to the Clinton Presidential Library, the 1990s, while Bill Clinton was president, were the period during which non-state foreign terrorism escalated. Knowing what we do about the Clintons, you have to wonder if that was just a coincidence or if it was planned that way. When discussing the Cole bombing with the 9/11 Commission, President Clinton said that he needed the CIA and FBI to be willing to stand up in public and say that they believed that bin Laden was responsible before he would launch an attack on al-Qaeda. According to one of Clinton's top aides, the intelligence agencies had not reached the conclusion that al-Qaeda was responsible for the attack on the USS Cole by the time Clinton left office. That wasn't true, and Ali was surprised when he read it. The FBI had determined that al-Qaeda was responsible for the attack not long after it happened, and Bill Clinton knew it. After George Bush won the 2000 election, Ali and others in the Bureau were happy because they believed they would receive more support for the investigation into the Cole bombing, as well as in their fight against al-Qaeda. Prior to the election, Bush told CNN, quote, I hope we can gather enough intelligence to figure out who did this act and take the necessary action. There must be a consequence. That turned into an empty promise since nothing changed after the election. By June 2001, al-Qaeda had begun making threats against investigators in Yemen, forcing them to relocate their work to another location. After a briefing with a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee and his chief of staff, the chief of staff closed the door and said that while he sympathized with the investigators' concern, people in the White House couldn't have al-Qaeda linked to the USS Cole attack. The investigators were shocked. Al-Qaeda had already been connected to the attack, and anyone with access to U.S. intelligence briefings knew it. The chief of staff responded by nervously saying, look, you need to understand what's really going on. The message was clear. The White House did not want Osama bin Laden tied to the USS Cole bombing. After the controversy surrounding the Bush-Gore election, President Bush was politically weak and didn't have the support of the country. If the Cole bombing was publicly declared as an al-Qaeda attack, and Bush didn't act upon that, he would look weak on national security. The White House doesn't want al-Qaeda blamed for the Cole. Ali responded by saying, that may be, but we report the fact. The fact is that al-Qaeda is behind the attack on the USS Cole. In a 2022 interview on The Bureau with Frank Filuzzi, Ali said he was stunned by the chief of staff's comments. Bush's failure to retaliate for the Cole bombing enraged bin Laden and pushed him to carry out the September 11th attacks. Both the Clinton administration and the Bush administration had the opportunity to act against Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda, but did not. Was that just politics, or was it something else? The two administrations weren't the only ones who failed to support the FBI's investigation of the source behind the USS Cole bombing. The State Department also dropped the ball. This is evident when reading about the actions of Barbara Bodine, the U.S. ambassador to Yemen, in both the Looming Tower and in the Black Banners. In the Looming Tower, Lawrence Wright highlighted the idea that U.S. diplomats should be reminded of the country that they serve. If an ambassador serving overseas is asked, which country do you represent? The correct answer is the United States. Ambassador Bodine's actions in Yemen suggest she was more responsive to the wishes of the Yemeni government than to those of the United States, or at the very least, the FBI. Her loyalty should have been to the United States, not Yemen. Based on how she was portrayed, Ambassador Bodine didn't conceal her hostility toward John O'Neill. When he returned to the U.S. for Thanksgiving, she refused to grant him clearance to return to Yemen to continue working on the USS Cole investigation. She believed his personality had alienated Yemeni authorities and undermined their cooperation. It's more likely that a personality conflict existed between her and O'Neill. Was Bodine given more power than she should have had? According to a 2008 Washington Post article, all of the defendants in the attack that were convicted in Yemen had either escaped from prison or were freed by Yemeni officials. The article says that the investigation's collapse revealed our government's failure to bring al-Qaeda to justice. In a section titled "A Clash of Cultures and Wills," Bodine is provided the opportunity to provide her insight. She said that the FBI was slow to trust Yemeni authorities and, quote, kept the U.S. Embassy in the dark, which she says hampered the investigation. That statement that she felt that the U.S. Embassy was kept in the dark carries a lot of weight. Was that the crux of the problem? Was Bodine offended that she didn't have more say in the investigation? What role did ego play in allowing al-Qaeda to slip away and become empowered to carry out the attacks on September 11th? About a week after this article, Ali Soufan submitted an opinion piece to the Washington Post titled "Coddling Terrorists in Yemen." He felt the need to respond to Bodine's comments, which he felt slandered the hard work of counterterrorism agents and distracted from the serious terrorist threat in Yemen. The country was supposed to be our ally in the war on terror. Ali said he had no idea how uncooperative their government would be or how disconnected from reality Bodine would be. Quote, Bodine was quoted in the article not urging the Yemeni government to rearrest the terrorists, but instead denigrating the agents who investigated the attack. She faulted the FBI as being slow to trust Yemeni authorities and said agents were, quote, dealing with a bureaucracy and a culture they didn't understand. We had one group working on a New York minute and another on a 4,000-year-old history, end quote. Ali pushed back. against Bodine's statement by saying that the investigative team included several Arab American agents who actually did understand the culture and the region. The team was working on a New York minute because, quote, we owed that much to the sailors who murdered on the coal and to all innocent people who remained targets as long as the terrorists were free. Rather than supporting us, Bodine declared John O'Neill, a man greatly respected by his Yemeni counterparts, persona non grata, end quote. According to Ali, many American officials in Yemen, including members of Bodine's team, shared the FBI's frustration. Quote, even victims of the coal were offended by her. I'll never forget one sailor telling me that Bodine visited the ship soon after the attack and acted as if we had just inconvenienced her country. Ali wrote, quote, we had other reasons to be suspicious. For example, the State Department issued a Search for Justice poster offering a reward for information related to the bombing. After the poster was translated into Arabic, it ended up warning anyone against helping us. Was it a mistake or a calculated interference? End quote. In the principal characters section of the Black Banners, the entry for Barbara Bodine says, quote, many in the FBI and the U.S. military investigating the USS Cole bombing felt she obstructed the investigation, end quote. All of America paid the price for that obstruction. Two administrations, the ambassador to Yemen, and now the CIA, were throwing up roadblocks to the FBI's investigation. Chapter 2, Corruption, Incompetence, or Arrogance, covers the agency's lack of support of the FBI, along with its apparent willingness to let those involved in the USS Cole bombing slip through the cracks. In a June 2001 meeting between a CIA supervisor and members of the FBI team investigating the attack, the supervisor produced surveillance photographs and asked if anyone from the FBI team could identify the individuals in the photos. The agents didn't recognize anyone and immediately began asking questions. Who were they? Where were the photos taken? What was the connection to the USS Cole? The FBI team was desperate for more information and argued with the CIA supervisor to try to get it. He refused, saying that it involved information that couldn't be shared with the agents. If that information had been shared, the September 11th attacks may never have occurred. Early in September 2001, Ali Soufan returned to Yemen to continue the investigation into the USS Cole bombing. Days later, he received news that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. He and his colleagues were to evacuate Yemen immediately and return to New York. As he waited at the airport, he was approached by a CIA officer and was told to call FBI headquarters. He was then told that he needed to remain in Yemen. Confused, he asked why he should remain when the United States had been attacked. He was told that the CIA had intelligence they needed him to look over. Back in the office, a CIA officer silently handed a file to Ali. Quote, inside were 3 pictures of Al-Qaeda operatives taken in Kuala Lumpur, along with a report of their activities there. The report and photos were all dated January 2000 and had been provided to the CIA by the Malaysians, end quote. This was the information that the CIA supervisor had previously said couldn't be shared with the FBI. As he stared at the pictures and the report, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The FBI had asked the CIA repeatedly if they knew anything about Malaysia. Quote, each time we'd asked, November 2000, April 2001, July 2001, they had said they knew nothing, end quote. But here was proof that the CIA had the information since January 2000. None of it had been passed to the FBI, despite their specifically asking about the information contained in the file. Some of the photos were of suspects who would later be identified as passengers on the flight that hit the Pentagon. Ali walked out of the room sprinted to the bathroom and fell to the floor next to a stall where he threw up. The same thought kept looping through his mind. If they had all of this information since January 2000, why the hell didn't they pass it on? When asked what was wrong, Ali responded, "They knew. They knew." After other members of the team realized the CIA had withheld information, they were understandably angry. Ali told them he shared their anger but urged the team to stay focused on the work in front of them, adding, "One day someone will ask the questions and find out." It's been 25 years. Will we ever find out the answer to these questions? Stay tuned for more on Ali Soufan. And you, all of you, stay tuned for the next episode in All Roads Lead to 9/11. The next episode is entitled, and this was yesterday, it was published. Finally, donbilly.substack.com. Chapter 5, The Marked Man. There has never been accountability for many of the things that took place around 9/11, and it has shaped the world that we live in today. Ali Soufan. It was the day after 9/11, September 12th, 2001, that former FBI agent Ali Soufan was handed a file containing critical intelligence that the CIA had been withholding. If the information contained in that file had been shared earlier, the 9/11 attacks might have been prevented. The 9/11 Commission concluded that a key factor in preventing the attacks was the failure to share information. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, additional information about what the CIA had known prior to 9/11 kept trickling out. It was clear that the agency still wasn't sharing key information with the FBI. In The Black Banners, a summary of the 9/11 Commission's operational opportunities highlights many missed opportunities, with the majority of them beginning with "the CIA does not." For years, the narrative has been that it was mainly the FBI who missed the signals that could have prevented 9/11. In reality, it seems the CIA bears a significant share of the blame. It's no surprise the FBI missed signals when the CIA was withholding critical information. In August 2003, while still working at the FBI, Ali was told that members of the 9/11 Commission had been asking questions about him. The CIA officials responsible for withholding the information were nervous of what he would say, so they were trying to discredit him in advance. When he sat down with the 9/11 Commission, one of their first questions was, "Why does the CIA hate you?" Rather than accept responsibility and work to ensure this never happened again, they wanted to cover it up and fight the FBI instead. Members of the agency were claiming that they had shared the information with the FBI. This wasn't true. And Ali asked his boss, Pat DeMuro, if it was okay that he tell the commission's investigators exactly where to look to find proof that it wasn't true. Pat agreed and told Ali to provide everything they needed. Previously, FBI agents were told that the FBI leadership would accept blame for 9/11 so they wouldn't upset anyone in the CIA or rock the boat. Pat's response was a marked change from that approach. As Ali was continuing his discussions with the 9/11 Commission, the CIA began complaining to FBI management about things he was telling them. Ali would provide information, and the investigators would return to the CIA with new questions. They wanted more information or clarification about not only the 9/11 attack, but also the USS Cole bombing. The Commission was realizing that the CIA hadn't been truthful with them. When the final 9/11 Commission report was published, everything Ali told them had been confirmed by their investigation. The idea that the FBI was to blame for 9/11 remains to this day. In a March 23, 2026 ABC News report on the passing of former FBI Director Robert Mueller, Pierre Thomas said, quote, "Sworn in just a week before 9/11, Mueller was immediately forced to transform an agency that had missed so many signals in failing to prevent the worst terror attack in American history. End quote. Because Robert Mueller had only been director of the FBI for a week when 9/11 happened, he and many on his leadership team were not fully aware of the FBI's involvement in terrorism investigations from prior years. They also weren't aware that the FBI had been requesting information that the CIA wasn't sharing. In the aftermath of the attacks, FBI management just wanted everyone to move on and start fresh. Even President Bush told the FBI and the CIA that he just wanted everyone to get along. Quote, "Those in the CIA who were responsible for not passing on information did their best to ensure that the truth didn't come out," said Ali. The FBI was being blamed for what happened on 9/11. How did the agents who had spent years working terrorism cases and who knew the truth feel about that? From the Black Banners, quote, "What really upset a few people on the 7th floor of Langley, the executive floor, was that the 9/11 Commission flatly contradicted the CIA's claims about sharing intelligence. The Commission showed the American people that if information had been shared, 9/11 might have been prevented." End quote. According to Ali, the most damning passage in the 9/11 Commission report is found on page 267. Quote, "DCI Tenet and Cofer Black testified before Congress's joint inquiry into 9/11 that the FBI had access to this identification from the beginning, but drawing on an extensive record, including documents that were not available to the CIA personnel who drafted that testimony, we conclude this was not the case." Quote, in a footnote to that line, one of the sources is Al S. Those in the CIA who had not shared the intelligence knew that this referred to Ali Soufan, and they hated me for it. End quote. After the 9/11 attacks, Ali remained in Yemen, where he and others continued their investigation into the attack on the USS Cole, as well as the attack on the United States. Gathering information about the hijackers and Al-Qaeda in general was a top priority for the US government. When the enhanced interrogation techniques, torture, of suspected Al-Qaeda suspects began, many officers in both the CIA and the FBI were opposed to it. When FBI management heard about it, they responded by saying, "We don't do that." And Director Mueller ordered the FBI agents to return to the United States. Ali maintains that evidence gained from torture is unreliable. For example, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed admitted that he gave his interrogators false information, telling them what he thought they wanted to hear in an effort to get them to stop the torture. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is still being held at Gitmo. In 2009, Ali wrote an opinion piece in the New York Times entitled "My Tortured Decision," where he corrects false claims concerning the effectiveness of enhanced interrogation techniques. He explains that the FBI was able to obtain important, actionable intelligence from KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, under traditional interrogation methods without torture. For example, they discovered that he was the mastermind of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. In a speech by President Bush, he acknowledged the use of torture and listed what he describes as its successes. It was clear to Ali that he was repeating false claims that were written in classified CIA memos. Ali felt the president had been misled about the effectiveness of the techniques. From that speech and from memos that were later declassified, Ali learned that supporters of the techniques were taking credit for intelligence that the FBI had gathered. In some cases, the CIA's claims were impossible, since they claimed their techniques allowed them to gain information about plots that had already been disrupted. In another case, the dates didn't line up. FBI agents were making progress with the suspects by building trust and rapport. In one example, agents learned a suspect was diabetic. They told him that they noticed he didn't eat the cookies they provided because of his sugar problem. Quote, "So today we brought you some sugar-free cookies that you can eat." The suspect was visibly surprised. He had learned to expect cruelty from Americans, not kindness. Soon after, the man began to cooperate. There were many examples where Ali and his team used respect and empathy to gain information from people who may have had information about past and future attacks. However, when the CIA contractors arrived with their enhanced interrogation techniques, the doors of cooperation soon closed. For many years before the documents were declassified, Ali had to remain silent as lies were told about the success of the CIA's interrogation techniques. A CIA official said in a television interview that one of the suspects wasn't cooperating until he was waterboarded for 35 seconds. The CIA official claimed he witnessed it himself, but later admitted that wasn't true. The suspect had been waterboarded 83 times, and they still hadn't learned anything new from him. According to a 2004 Inspector General's report, official CIA memos hid the success of the FBI interrogations and made it look as if they hadn't been involved in the interrogations. The CIA was taking credit for work that the FBI was doing. In 2008, Ali gave a classified briefing to staffers of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. The staffers present were shocked. What Ali told them contradicted everything they'd been told by the Bush administration and CIA officials. When asked if he could prove what he was saying, Ali responded, "Remember, an FBI agent always keeps his notes." Locked in a secure safe in the FBI New York office were his handwritten notes of everything that happened. It's amazing that there weren't more terrorist attacks given the constant obstacles the FBI faced both before and after 9/11. Ali was working with a prosecutor from the SDNY on a plea agreement for a suspect held at Gitmo. The suspect was to plead guilty and would agree to testify against other al-Qaeda members. As he was working on the terms of the agreement, Ali heard a CNN News report that President Bush had named the suspect an enemy combatant. Many people at the FBI and Southern District of New York were surprised that President Bush hadn't consulted with them first. As an enemy combatant, the FBI would no longer have access to the suspect. They couldn't ask him questions about other al-Qaeda members or use him as a witness in other trials. Instead, he was given lawyers who helped him mount a lengthy and successful legal challenge against the military system that had been set up at Gitmo. During his trial, the suspect's defense attorneys criticized the government for throwing out a plea agreement that would have allowed the suspect to become a cooperating witness and would have subjected him to a longer prison term. Quote, "We hope one day the American people find out about this squandered opportunity." Unfortunately, not much changed after the 9/11 attacks. The CIA didn't suddenly become working partners with the FBI. They were still withholding information and making it difficult for them to continue their investigation. In September 2002, suspected al-Qaeda members were captured and Ali and others flew overseas to interrogate them. Rather than allow them time to gain crucial information, the FBI agents were given 45 minutes to complete their interrogations of two high-value suspects. After gaining one of the suspects' confidence, Ali asked if any attacks were currently in the works. He told Ali that a plan was underway for an operation against an oil tanker and provided Ali with possible locations where the attack might take place. The agents wrote up the information and disseminated it throughout the CIA. They also contacted FBI headquarters and advised them of the information. "That's the exact definition of actionable intelligence," said Pat Damuro. With that information, they felt they could stop the plot if they acted on it quickly. That wasn't the case. Instead, the CIA deputy chief of station stormed into the office and yelled, "Who the hell told the FBI HQ these guys were cooperating?" The suspects were scheduled to be sent to another location, and nobody could stop that from happening. When Ali pushed back, saying this was a mistake since they had clear, actionable intelligence, the response was, "This is bigger than you. This is an order coming from the White House. There is nothing you or the FBI can do." The CIA denied that the suspects had cooperated with the FBI. They claimed the intelligence the FBI gathered wasn't true. According to them, The threat of an oil tanker explosion didn't exist, and the suspect had lied about the plot. They were wrong. Just weeks later, an oil tanker was set on fire off the coast of Yemen, just as predicted by the al-Qaeda suspect. Ali writes, quote, "There is no way to describe the feeling of knowing you could have stopped a terrorist attack if only your government had supported you. It was that terrible feeling again." End quote. Pat DeMuro asked Ali who he had sent his memo to that warned of a potential oil tanker attack. He wanted to be sure that it had been widely disseminated. Ali responded that it had been distributed to all U.S. government agencies through Department of Defense channels. As they did with the attack on the USS Cole, Yemeni officials blamed the fire on an accident and not a terrorist attack. The FBI was told to go along with the Yemenis' position and were instructed not to write reports advising that it was a terrorist attack. Ali explains that the memo was based on information he learned from the interrogation of an al-Qaeda suspect who warned of a possible attack. That memo became known as the Crystal Ball Memo because it was so accurate. There are many examples in Ali's book that support the main point of these papers. Did the investigation into 9/11 really end after the 9/11 Commission published their report? Why were the failures in possibly stopping the 9/11 attacks placed mainly on the FBI? What was the FBI's response to that? Did the FBI, knowing the truth behind the failures of others in our government, continue an off-the-books investigation into what really happened that day? By 2005, Ali's boss, Pat DeMuro, announced that he was leaving the FBI to begin working at a private consulting firm. He told Ali to come with him. By that time, it was clear to Ali that some high-level people at the CIA were specifically targeting him. He was told by many FBI executives and CIA colleagues that he was a marked man ever since his interview with the 9/11 Commission. After a series of discussions over several weeks, Ali accepted the job offer. He joined Pat DeMuro in working for Rudy Giuliani's private security firm. The connections among so many people continue to amaze me. Would Mayor Giuliani play a role in an investigation into what really happened in 9/11? Is it possible that he was working alongside members of the FBI, the SDNY, the DOJ, and others in investigating the attacks? The prologue to this series explains Mayor Giuliani's response immediately following the attacks in New York. Quote, "At a press conference the morning after the 9/11 attacks, New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani said, 'We were able to move 120 dump trucks out of the city last night.' According to the New York State Museum, by nightfall on September 11th, Mayor Giuliani had reopened the Fresh Kills facility, a massive landfill in Staten Island, which had been closed since March. The facility was given a crime scene designation so that it could receive what remained of the World Trade Center. This also prevented anyone other than designated personnel from accessing the evidence. In the early morning hours of September 12th, trucks began arriving at the Fresh Kills facility with loads of steel and material from Ground Zero. The NYPD and FBI evidence response teams arrived in the early morning hours to begin the inspection and search for evidence. Rather than destroying evidence, as many accused Mayor Giuliani of doing, was he actually preserving it and removing it before it could be further destroyed?" End quote. Giuliani Partners was founded by Rudy Giuliani in January 2002. The firm focused on security, emergency preparedness, crisis management, and leadership, drawing on Giuliani's experience as mayor during the 9/11 attacks. Many of the executives of Giuliani Partners were connected to events surrounding 9/11. Two senior vice presidents included the former New York Police Commissioner, Bernard Kerik, and former New York Fire Commissioner, Thomas von Essen. In addition, Pat DeMuro, Ali's former boss at the FBI was named chairman and CEO of the subsidiary Giuliani Security and Safety. There is a great deal of secrecy surrounding Giuliani's firm. Clients are required to sign confidentiality agreements, and Giuliani had declined to discuss his clients or details of the business, according to a 2007 Washington Post article co-written by John Solomon, of all people. Because of the secrecy surrounding Giuliani's firm, a request to visit his office was denied. According to the article, because of this secrecy, it's difficult to form a complete picture of the firm and its operations. Only limited information is publicly available about Giuliani's clients. One client was the founder of a company who performed electronic information gathering on individuals, data mining. This data mining product caught the attention of federal and state authorities after the September 11th attacks because it claimed it could identify potential terrorists by searching through billions of public records. That struck me as strange, since the government previously had its own data mining product. Around 1999 to 2000, the Able Danger program was tasked with data mining open source information to analyze information on al-Qaeda suspects. Before the 9/11 attacks, the Able Danger team identified several suspected terrorists and developed charts linking their connections to different al-Qaeda cells. Arrangements were made to turn their findings over to the FBI, but they were blocked from doing so by the Department of Defense. Another roadblock for the FBI. The Able Danger program was shut down, and in mid-2000, the team was ordered to delete all the material they had accumulated. After the 9/11 attacks, members of the Able Danger team realized that several of the hijackers were contained in the data they collected. Specifically, they had identified and assembled a chart containing photos of Mohammed Atta, the supposed leader of the 9/11 hijackers, and other terrorists. A firm who developed a program similar to the work done by Able Danger was later represented by Rudy Giuliani's firm. Interesting coincidence. In a BBC interview, Ali was asked if he thought his story could inadvertently play into the hands of all those around the world who believe that there is some sort of conspiracy theory about 9/11, that there's some sort of government complicity. Ali responded by saying he doesn't believe in conspiracy theories. He tried to put a human face to the steps that caused 9/11. He agrees that the conclusion that the 9/11 Commission reached, that if information was shared with the FBI team investigating the USS Cole, 9/11 could have been stopped in the early stages. He went on to say that conspiracy theories usually come about because people are looking for answers. He's right. We are. And that, my friends, is the donbilly.substack.com presentation, All Roads Lead to 9/11. I will clarify that I only look at the testimony of Ali Soufan and others in our government as pieces of a puzzle. None of it has to be true, but all of it is interesting and all of it is worth looking at. So the testimony of an FBI counterterrorism expert, counterterrorism investigator, whether what he says is true or not, whether what we're seeing there is real or not, it still merits very close scrutiny. Because whether or not 9/11 happened in the way that we are told that it happened, because it didn't, the stories surrounding it are absolutely essential to understanding the nature of the world in which we live. I want to thank everybody for watching today's episode of Reading Epic Threads. If you'd like to support this channel, you can hit the thumbs up button. You could share this with your friends. And finally, you can go to tulipblooms.shop and buy your mother an amazing Mother's Day gift. Massive discounts, guys. The Mother's Day basket. It's all about giving you savings while giving mom the very best present that money can buy. Tulipblooms.shop. Promo code Shapiro for even bigger savings. Let us pray. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. I love you all. Thank you so much for being here. I am going to raid the Kate Awakening channel. When Are My Socks? Which is happening right now. Bye, guys.